Have you often wondered whether our loved ones can hear us, communicate with us in some way after they pass over? I think most people throughout history have wondered this. I think most people who are spiritually minded or religious minded even have often wondered this. Do we receive communication from people after they pass over? I always think about the story of Harry Houdini back in the 1920s. And apparently, when he died, he had told his wife, because they were into going to seances and things like that, he told his wife that he would send her a message through a seance after he died. And according to all reports, that never occurred. So, is it possible that some people do communicate with people once they've crossed over and other people for some reason can't? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think any of us know the answer to that. I don't think we're going to know that till we cross over ourselves and realize, what we're able to do or not able to do. I do believe very firmly, I've stated this in other videos I've done on this channel, that I do believe our soul continues on after death. I do believe our spirit goes someplace after we die, and that someplace in my mind is much better. Now, some people might call that heaven. I don't know that I would call it heaven in the traditional sense, but I do believe it's a better place that we go to. Now, are we able to communicate from there? Don't know. But I'm going to share with you today the story of my mother and what happened when she died back in 2014. I not only received direct communication from her when I was alone, but I also received communication from her through a medium about 3 weeks after she died. Stay tuned for that. It'll be towards the end of this video. So when my mother died, she had not been ill a long time. She actually had gotten an infection and it had turned into sepsis, and she chose not to have it treated, and she went on hospice. So she was really only sick maybe for the last couple of weeks of her life, really. And we spoke on the phone. I was not near her when she died because she was up in Seattle and I was down in Arizona, and I could not get up there, when she was sick. So we spoke on the phone about 12 hours before she died, and it was a beautiful, connection with us, which I think was even more poignant because we had had a troubled history for most of my adulthood. My mother and I had been close when I was a child, but my mother had a lot of issues, and I ended up having issues like most of us do. And she also became a late in life alcoholic, which created a real problem in the relationship with her, even long distance. So although we were still speaking up until the time she died, I wouldn't say that we were exceptionally close. I have an older sister who we always had a troubled relationship as well, she and she had a troubled relationship with our mother and, the whole family. It's just, I come from a very dysfunctional family. When my mother died, we had said what we needed to say 12 hours before, and it was beautiful. I mean, I was able to tell her I loved her. She told me she loved me. I asked her, because my mother was a very spiritual person deep down. And she also had a lot of abilities, as I shared in another video that I did a few weeks ago. And so I wanted to know that she was, first of all, okay, that she was accepting, in other words, of dying. But also I wanted to know that she understood what was happening. And so I asked her those questions in that conversation, and she was able, I really gathered from what she told me that she was totally okay with it. So I don't think she had a lot of fear at the end or anything. I certainly did not ask my mother to contact me after she died. It was definitely not really on my mind at the time. Well, when she passed, it was early in the morning, and I got a call from my sister. And I'm not going to go into the whole details of this particular aspect, but my sister basically manipulated me into signing off on my mother being cremated. My mother had always wanted to be buried in a casket. My father's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. She was able to be buried with him. She wanted a casket. She had told me that all her life. She had told me, my sister, that. My sister, again, this did not come out until weeks later, but my sister was basically taking all my mother's money and property. And I think she had gotten a trust created. I said I wasn't going to go into all this, but I kind of need to explain like what my mother was saying to me after she died. So my sister basically betrayed my mother's wishes and got me to agree the morning that my mother died to a cremation, even though I protested because I said, and I knew my sister, even if she hadn't inherited my mother's money, which wasn't a huge amount. I knew that my sister had the money to pay for a casket. It was not a financial burden for her. So that whole thing was kind of ugly. And I did agree in the, midst of grieving that morning, I did agree and contacted the funeral home and all this to agree to the cremation, which I really regretted because, again, I knew my mom's wishes. So fast forward a few days, actually 5 days after my mother died, and I was sitting in my car one day outside a laundromat. And I all of a sudden was just surrounded by my mother's presence. I guess there's really no other way to say it other than that. I felt like my mother was in the car with me. Like I couldn't see her, but I could feel almost her touch there. And I could just feel, how when somebody's sitting with you in a car, you know what that feels like to have someone else there. That's exactly what it felt like. It was like she was sitting in the passenger seat and I was overwhelmed. Like I actually had tears come to my eyes because I knew instantly it was my mother. Like I could sense her, not just any presence. I really knew it was my mother. And she communicated with me, not so that my ears could hear, but it was almost like a telepathy. And she said to me very plainly inside my head, she goes, "I'm so sorry for everything." She said, "I was wrong." And then she said, "I backed the wrong horse." Now, it was an interesting thing for my mom to say. Of course, she knew I loved horses. But she said it, and it was in regards to my sister. Because in some ways, the last maybe 20 years of my mother's life, she had really given preference to my sister. And I think she realized at the end it was my sister who betrayed her and cremated her. And also was taking everything she had, basically, which was, I don't really believe was my mother's intention. But then my mother just kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I kept hearing this like inside my brain over and over again. And I was crying at that point. I had tears streaming down my face. Now, she didn't just appear this one time to me and say this. But it was almost on a daily basis for the next 3 weeks. She would pop in when I was driving down the road. She would pop in when I was, I was teaching at the time. And when I was grading papers at home in the evening, she would just all of a sudden be there and I could sense her. It's almost like I could actually smell her. Not that my mother had like a signature cologne or perfume or something, but I could just almost smell the difference in the air when she was there. And she popped in, and the most, I would say the most horrifying time she popped in was I was taking a shower one day. I'm in the shower and I feel my mom there. And I go, "What are you doing?" I actually said it out loud. I go, "What are you doing? Leave me alone. I'm taking a shower. Could you just check in later?" And so she went away. It was a very strange, I have never had anything like this before this time in my life, ever. So it was very strange. I definitely knew that her spirit was there at times. She would just pop in for, 5 minutes, something like that, and then she would be gone. So anyway, the day she did at least leave me alone in the shower after that. I was like, "What are you thinking? I know you don't have a physical body anymore, but I do. And I really don't like the intrusion at this moment. So, anyway, about 3 weeks into after my mother died, I got a notice from this. It was like a new age bookstore kind of thing. I don't really know what to call it, but they had like psychic readings on the weekends, and they had somebody that could map your aura and stuff like that. But they were having a medium, actually one of the most prominent mediums in the Phoenix area, come and do some readings as a medium. And it was $25 a person, and they were limiting it to 25 people. And everybody was guaranteed to get a reading from this medium. So I saw that, and it was happening within a few days. And so I was able to book a spot. And the night that I went to the reading, I'm driving over there, and my mother's in the car with me. It's like she knew what was going on. She knew where I was going. And I said, well, what are you doing? She didn't really answer questions like that. She normally just, it was like what I received from her was a lot of love, and I would get like an occasional, like, forgive me, or I'm so sorry, and I love you, that kind of thing. She didn't really respond to actual questions, all right? But I would get this telepathic, communication in some way from her. Well, I knew that she somehow knew where I was going, and she was going with me. So we get to the place, and we're seated in this little room, and there's only 25 people, and I had never seen this medium before. In fact, I've honestly never really been a big fan of mediums, because I'm not sure whether they're really reading people or not, or really, I'm talking about people on the other side. I don't know how genuine a lot of them are. It's kind of like when I did my video on psychics. It's the same kind of thing for me. But I tell you, this was amazing. So I was sitting there, and we didn't know, the guy just started kind of, saying stuff to us, but we never know who he was going to read. And so the first guy he chose in the audience, I think it was his father had passed or something. And we spent a few minutes with him. And then I'm just kind of sitting there listening to that. And all of a sudden he goes, wow. And he looked at me, this medium, and he goes, your mom is really strong. And I go, yeah. And he goes, did she just pass? And I go, yeah, like 2-3 weeks ago. He goes, wow. She's really here. And I go, yeah, because I knew even before he said it, she was standing like just to the side of me over here, like standing next to me while I'm sitting in the seat. Like I could feel her right there. So he validated that, which kind of blew me away. And then for the next 10 minutes, I think he spent on it, he was telling me things about her. And he said something really amazing, which didn't register till later. He goes, your mom has a really great sense of humor, which she did. And he said, and she has a very sweet soul. And I thought that was so odd, because sweet was not the word I would have used to describe my mom, especially in the latter years of her life. But by the next day, when I thought about it, I realized everything I'd been sensing for the last couple of weeks, she had been really sweet. There was this sweetness to her spirit, which was undeniable. And so somehow on the other side, I really believed that was her true spirit. That was her true soul, was to be this very sweet being. So anyway, he described that. He told me some things about her life, which were accurate. And then amazingly, my dad died when I was 10. He actually communicated with my dad, who was not standing right next to my mom, but that makes sense because they were kind of on the beginning of being estranged when he died. And so it made sense that they weren't together exactly on the other side. But he was able to correctly talk about my dad being a military person, and he talked about he was brilliant at engineering, which he was. I mean, just these things that were so strange that he could sense. And so I was blown away. I wasn't surprised because I knew my mother was right there. I was a little surprised that he picked up on my dad. So after he was done with all the readings, I kind of just sat there, and my mother was still in the room, by the way. And at one point during his readings with other people, he looked at me and he said, "She won't go away, will she?" I go, "No, not really. She's fascinated by this." So he laughed, the medium laughed and stuff like that. Anyway, at the end, when everybody was out milling about and he was kind of gathering up his belongings, I was still just sitting in a chair, and everybody else was out of this little room. And he looked over at me and he goes, "She was afraid of it, wasn't she?" And I said, "What?" And he goes, "Her psychic ability. She was very psychic, but she was afraid of it." And that was so true. Absolutely true about my mother. So I really do believe that he picked up on my mom that night. She was there. I could feel her. And so I do think he was a genuine medium. I do think he knew he could sense much more about her than I could in that moment, of course, because I don't have the ability to see people or have them actually talk to me. It's more of a telepathy kind of thing. And I drove home, and my mom was in the car going home. I mean, she had a busy night there. I mean, really intense night for her. And so over time, what I noticed is she would pop in less and less. Like as the weeks went by, she would occasionally still come to me and remind me how much she loved me, which was so welcome. I mean, considering that we had had a tough relationship the last probably 30 years of her life, that meant so much to me that she was able to tell me again and again that she loved me and that she apologized for anything she had ever done to me. I mean, it meant the world, literally. So that's the story of how my mother apologized to me after she died. And it's really kind of, I will give you my interpretation of what I think happens when we die. Now, again, this is just me. I'm not basing this on any psychic knowledge of any kind. I kind of am very analytical. And so I try to think about what happens when someone passes over, but they have a lot of unfinished business with someone, or they need to apologize, or maybe they have a lot of psychological or psychic wounds inside of them. I really believe there's something known, and I named this myself, called spiritual intensive care, otherwise known as SIC, S-I-C, get it? Anyway. Spiritual intensive care, I believe, is where people go when they cross over until they really, kind of merge in with the general population of the other side. In other words, wherever they're supposed to go, or if they're supposed to being reincarnated or something like that. I don't know what happens after that. I do believe it's almost like we would view a cross between a mental hospital and a spiritual hospital. I believe they go to this place where they probably have to do a life review, because a lot of things have talked about that, of doing a life review. And I really believe that they are given lessons and they are given tasks to do. In other words, in order to heal their soul completely, they have to do certain things. And I do believe that one of those things my mother had to do was apologize to me and come to me and make things right with me. I think that was part of whatever healing she had to do on the other side. That's how I make sense of this. Because over time, she stopped coming to me. She's moved on, basically. I mean, hopefully. I hope for her sake she moved on. I realize time is very different on that side than on this, plane of existence. But I do believe that after a certain amount of time, they move on and we don't necessarily have contact with them the same way. but it meant so much for me to have that contact with her, to have that connection with her. I am not a person who's ever hallucinated before as far as that type of thing at all. I mean, I'd never had an instance in which somebody had died and I had felt like they came and, you know, chatted with me. Like, just never happened. And I really do believe it was really her. And I really believe that her presence was so, my mother did have a tremendous amount of strength, like the medium said. She was a strong person. She had a very strong personality. She had a very strong spiritual presence. She had this psychic ability, which she was afraid of, tremendous sense of humor. And she had this great sweetness about her after she died, especially. I'm sure she was that way as a child, that she'd had that sweetness. And then, whatever had happened in her life had kind of, altered that. But when she crossed over, I think we returned to the purest form of our own soul. I think that is who we really are. And so I wanted to share that with you today. It is one of the really greatest experiences I've ever had. And you don't have to believe it. I believe it because it happened to me, and I really don't have any other explanation other than that was my mom visiting me. So anyway, if you've had any experiences like this, please share them below. And please, if you've enjoyed this story time today, drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already done so to the channel. It means a lot to me. So until next time, be kind to yourself and to others, and take care. Bye.